Okay, we're good for a mic check.
These three was...
You hear that?
Oh, I got it.
All right.
I mean, it's working.
It's working. Something's working.
Hey guys, welcome back to Craze and Fusion. We're in week 2 of our Christmas series. While we wait, we're looking at the stories of the Christmas story to talk about how we can wait well by looking at stories of those who had to wait. Last week we talked about Simeon, who waited for the promise that God had given him to come true. And this week we're going to look at a second person whose story reveals how we can wait with hope.
And cue music. We hope for a lot of things. We hope that our present we ask for will be underneath the Christmas tree on December 25th. Family, if you're watching, I hope you know exactly what I want. We hope that our families will get along at our Christmas get-togethers. We hope that our team will win in the playoffs. And we hope that by now, you're listening to Christmas music. If you're not listening to Christmas music already, what is your problem?
Yeah, like why wouldn't you be doing that?
Like, who would ever tell you not to listen to Christmas music?
That's absurd.
Crazy.
Absolutely absurd. We're going back to Luke chapter 2 to take a look at a second person in this story. Last week we looked at Simeon, and this week we're going to look at a woman named Anna. So let's return to the Christmas story in Luke chapter 2.
We'll start in verse 22. When the time came for the purification rites required by the law of Moses, Joseph and Mary took him, that's Jesus, to Jerusalem to present him to the Lord. As it is written in the law of the Lord, every firstborn male is to be consecrated to the Lord, and to offer a sacrifice in keeping with what is said in the law of the Lord, a pair of doves or 2 young pigeons. Now there was also a prophet, Anna, the daughter of Penuel of the tribe of Asher. She was very old. She had lived with her husband 7 years after her marriage, and then was a widow until she was 84. She never left the temple but worshipped night and day, fasting and praying. Coming up to them at that very moment, she gave thanks to God and spoke about the child to all who were looking forward to the redemption of Jerusalem. When Joseph and Mary had done everything required by the law of the Lord, they returned to Galilee to their own town of Nazareth. And the child grew and became strong, and he was filled with wisdom, and the grace of God was on him.
Well, first glance at Anna's situation tells me that she was living a life that I wouldn't envy at all. I wouldn't want to live this life at all. I mean, I have no desire to lose my wife and to live alone. Like, that's not something I would want to be true of my life. I mean, I'd rather have my life described like Jair, who we looked at last week, who had 30 sons and 30 donkeys. Like, that seems better to me than to be described like Anna.
Right, or at least carry around an ox goad.
Yeah, even that would be better than to have to live alone.
Did you Google it?
That's the question.
That's the question.
But this woman whose life wasn't enviable at all, like none of us would want that situation, nevertheless, she's described as someone who is filled with hope. She lived with hope. Unlike Simeon, she was not given a specific promise that something would come true during her lifetime. All that she had was hope. Really, all that she had was actually what you and I have. She just had the scriptures that said that this would happen at some point. She was living off a prophecy that had been given over 600 years earlier. And so generations upon generations had passed, but she was still living with hope in the middle of that.
Yeah, 600-year-old prophecy written by the prophet Isaiah. In Isaiah 52:9, here's what he writes. Burst into songs of joy together, you ruins of Jerusalem, for the Lord has comforted his people. He has redeemed Jerusalem. That's what she had. Maybe a little bit more, but that specific prophecy about Jerusalem filled this woman with hope. So what we want to do is zero in a little bit more on this woman, Anna. So David and I have written down some facts and observations about her life from this passage, and we want to bring those to you. First, let's talk about her age. Last week we looked at Simeon, and we said that the Bible, the writers of Scripture, don't really mess around when they're describing people.
That's right.
Simeon was righteous and devout. Now Luke has some words for Anna, and he also chose a couple words, and they are very old. This woman is very old. What does it take to qualify as being described as very old? We don't know. But depending upon the Bible translation you use and how you reckon the numbers and how it's worded, this woman is at least 84 years old. And depending upon, again, how you do it, she could have been 104 years old in some records. So Luke, as a doctor, wrote this woman a prescription and said, congratulations, you're very old. So that's what we know.
Yeah, either way, she's very old, whether it's 84 or 104.
Right, and so maybe that means Simeon was young, because Luke doesn't say anything about his age.
Yeah.
Who knows?
We don't know. Well, we do know her name was Anna. It's the Greek form of the Hebrew name Hannah in the Old Testament, and that both of those names mean grace. And like the Old Testament Hannah, she's described as someone who is characterized by prayer and by fasting.
Amazing. Yeah, and she's also a prophet or a prophetess. So she's a female prophet. Doesn't necessarily mean she predicted the future, but God did use her to speak his word to people. Now, women in the Bible did all kinds of amazing things and had all kinds of significant roles to play, but only a select few were known as prophets, and Anna was one such woman.
Yeah, and she also, we know that she was married for 7 years, and for somebody who's very old, that's not a very long time.
Right.
And so she lived for a lot of years without a husband. And it's also curious that it doesn't mention anything about any children in this passage. Children were a big deal at this time and in this culture, and so the fact that they're not mentioned means she probably didn't have any, or maybe they just weren't a big part of her life. And that would be a very hard thing for someone at this time. I mean, children were really a source of their identity as a mother. They were a source of their security as they could provide for them in their old age. And so she's described as somebody who doesn't have a lot of great relationships.
Yeah, it doesn't paint a great picture. I mean, when someone finally gets around to writing the biography of my life and chronicling words is hard, David.
They are hard.
Chronicling all that I've accomplished, I sure hope that they talk about my relationship with Kristen and my relationship with my kids and how wonderful all of that was. But Anna was not living out that reality. Certainly she was written about, but nothing about her husband, because she was widowed, or any kind of children. And how would you expect someone to respond who went through something like that?
Yeah.
You would expect that person to say, you know what, my life is over, life stinks, and maybe they're bitter, maybe they're angry, maybe they give themselves to all of their passions. You just never know how someone's going to respond. But Luke says that Anna never left the temple. She worshiped day and night. That is some serious commitment to worship. That's some serious commitment to God. Not only that, but Luke says that she talked about this hope in Jesus to the people who also shared that hope. So whether she talked to people before Joseph and Mary came with Jesus, or whether talked to people after they left, all we know is she did talk to people about the hope that she had in Jesus. And interesting that Luke says she talked to people who shared this hope, meaning that there were people of God who had access to the scriptures just like she did, who had no hope.
Yeah.
That's sad.
Yeah, that is sad. But we know that Anna was somebody who lived with hope, and we know that while waiting for something to come true she wasn't promised like Simeon would, that it would happen during her lifetime, but while waiting for that, she spent her time night and day. She was praying and she was fasting. She was in the temple constantly. And we know she had hope in the middle of what would kind of humanly look like a hopeless situation. Like if I were in that situation, I'm pretty sure I would feel kind of hopeless. I think I would probably be rather hopeless. But in the middle of that situation, she had hope. And we know she had hope because if she didn't, what would be the point of worshiping God?
Right.
I mean, people who are worshiping God, they have hope in him, right? Like if you lose hope in God, you don't spend your life worshiping him. You don't spend your time giving everything that you have to him. You run away from him. And quite frankly, that's almost what we would expect for someone in her situation, but that's not what we see. What we see is that she spends her nights and her days worshiping God.
So let's try to bring this all home for all of us. Her hope led to immediate decisions, like street level, daily decisions. When I think of hope, I tend to think of like it as a lofty idea, this thing that's out there. But hope for Anna was not out there. It was right there with her. It's hunting season. Yeah. So I've been out deer hunting. And when it's cold and when it's snowy and rainy, I remain in my tree stand. Why? Because I have hope that a deer is going to come by and I'm going to harvest one. Yeah. So it does impact my daily decisions. Anna's hope in the fact that Jesus would come and redeem Jerusalem determined her daily decisions. So her actions, the trajectory of her life was immediately impacted by her hope and ultimately the character of God, because he's the one who promised the rescue.
Yeah. So last week we talked about Simeon, who knew the promise would be fulfilled before he died, but all Anna had was hope that God would redeem Jerusalem someday, that he would do it someday, right? And similarly, I think you and I have promises of God that we don't know when or even maybe how they're going to be fulfilled. I think in a lot of ways we're like Anna. We don't know when Jesus is going to return. We're told that he will.
True.
We don't know when. We don't know when or how God is going to provide and going to meet our needs. He said that he will, right? But we don't know when. We don't know when God is going to deal with injustice in our lives. Is he going to do that in this life, in the next? We don't know. But as we're waiting, do we do so in trusting in who God is and in what he said? Do we actually believe that he's going to do what he said he would do?
Yeah, and that really zeroes in on our hope in the promises of God and things that he's actually said he would do. Mm-hmm. But what about hope when God hasn't promised something?
Yeah.
What do we do with hope when what we think God would do, because he's a God of love, he's a God of goodness, doesn't match up with what we're actually experiencing? I have to think Anna kind of lived in that world, where what she knew to be true about God didn't seem to be represented in her experience. She had a tough life, a widow after 7 years, probably married young, alone for a long period of time. The God that she knew didn't really seem to come through with the quality of life that she wanted.
Yeah.
I don't know anyone who would want that type of life. So she's living out a reality worse than I'm living, worse than you're living. I mean, you're short, that's hard to deal with. But this woman, she lost her husband. She had no children to speak of. But she was a woman of hope. And I think it begs the question, when there's a distance between what we would expect of God and what we actually experience, what do we put in that gap? Doubt, anger, bitterness? Are we so disappointed that we numb ourselves and medicate ourselves so we don't have to feel the disappointment? Or like Anna, do we put hope right in that gap and just say, listen, I know who God is because of what he said in his word. My experience is not matching up, but I still believe that what he said is true because I believe in the one who gave me this hope, who made the promises. That's Anna. I think we have a lot to take away from her.
Yeah, she's somebody who really had all kinds of reasons not to hope in God. Yet she's described as someone who has hope.
Yeah, a very unlikely story.
Yeah. She knew that God knew better and that he was going to provide, that he was going to do what she needed, that he knew what she actually needed. And like Anna, your choices and your responses demonstrate where your hope is, and if you actually believe that God is going to do what he said, that he's going to be consistent with the kind of God that he is, right? She was described as someone who's faithful. And so our question for you today is, are you? In whatever circumstances you find yourself in, are you faithful? Because I think in good circumstances, it's often easy to hope in those good circumstances, or maybe even in our ability to keep them good, right? Mm-hmm. And in bad situations, it's often easy to lose hope, to not trust in God, to doubt him, to turn away from him. And so in whatever circumstances you might find yourself in, are you somebody who's living with hope like Anna?
Yeah. I think Anna also helps us to ask the question, are we hoping in God, or are we hoping in our idea of God? Like in who he actually is, or in what we hope he's like? I think, if I'm honest, I can get caught in worshiping the God based on what I think he's going to do.
Yeah.
And not just settling for what he's done and being okay with that, because as you said, he just knows better. So what about you? Based on your current trajectory, what are you putting in that gap between what you hope God will accomplish, what you're waiting for, and what your life's experience has been up to this point? What goes there? Is it doubt? Is it discouragement? Is it bitterness? Is it anger? Is it distraction? Or are you going to be like Anna? Could it be that you could be a person of hope? I think Anna shows us it's possible. Yeah. We can get after that.
Well, we'd like you to consider these questions and more in your group as you talk about how you can wait well and how you can wait in hope.
And last of all, we would not want to fail to say to you, from David, who's kind of short, and from me, who's a little taller, Merry Christmas. And Merry Christmas from all of us at Bridgewater Student Ministries. We'll see you in the new year right here on this channel.